This is the story of a black boy and a billionaire woman, how the boy helped those save billionaire women's life, and boy's life totally changed like getting the start. The airport was alive with movement, yet for him, time felt strangely still. He was only 20 years old, and already, life felt like a storm he was learning to navigate. A young black man with hopeful eyes, carrying a backpack worn from too many bus rides and too many dreams too big for the small town he had come from. He sat in the waiting area of the terminal, surrounded by the hum of rolling suitcases, flight announcements echoing overhead, and the restless shuffle of strangers hurrying toward their gates. He was waiting for his flight, the one he believed could change everything. It wasn't just another trip. This journey was supposed to be the start of something bigger, a step into a future that had felt just out of reach. He had worked long hours, saved every dollar, and made sacrifices most people would never know about just to afford the ticket that sat folded in his pocket. To him, this plane wasn't just about traveling. It was about transformation. The boy leaned back in the cold metal chair, his heart racing with anticipation. He imagined what waited for him on the other side of the journey. New opportunities, maybe a career, maybe even a chance to escape the weight of limitations that had followed him since childhood. In his head, he could already see the city lights of the place he was headed, glowing with possibility. He believed that if he could just get there, everything might finally fall into place. Around him, the airport buzzed like a hive of lives intersecting only for moments. Families laughed as they juggled luggage. Children cried from exhaustion. Business travelers tapped impatiently on their phones. Everyone seemed to be rushing, chasing their own destinations. Yet, in the middle of that noise, he felt calm. His eyes scanned the terminal, observing the blur of humanity with quiet fascination. He was a watcher of people, someone who found stories in the faces around him. That's when his gaze caught something different. Across the terminal, on a bench that seemed slightly apart from the main crowd, sat a woman. She looked to be in her late 40s, maybe early 50s. Her clothes were elegant but understated, the kind of outfit that spoke of someone who carried herself with dignity rather than flash. She sat alone, her posture graceful, yet there was a tension in her shoulders that set her apart from the calm or distracted travelers nearby. At first, he didn't think much of it. People sit, people wait. But something about her presence tugged at him. She wasn't reading a book, scrolling on her phone, or staring absently like most travelers. She was simply still, as if she were lost inside herself. He looked away for a moment, trying not to stare. After all, he had his own worries to think about. His flight would begin boarding soon. He checked the large electronic display on the wall, tracing the line of departures until his eyes landed on his flight number. The city name lit up like a beacon in his chest. He smiled faintly, the anticipation building. But when he looked back toward the bench, the smile faded. The woman had shifted in her seat, and not in the casual way of someone adjusting to get comfortable. Her hand was pressed against her chest, her face pale. Her other hand gripped the bench tightly, as though anchoring herself against something unseen. Her body language had changed in an instant, from composed stillness to quiet distress. His pulse quickened. Something was wrong. For a second, he told himself it wasn't his place. He was just a young man in a busy airport. Surely someone else would notice. Surely someone else would step forward. But around her, people kept moving, too focused on their own departures to see the silent struggle unfolding right before them. He leaned forward in his seat, uncertainty gnawing at him. Should he intervene? Or was he imagining things? The loudspeaker above announced the first BOA boarding call for his flight, pulling his attention back to the gate. His plane, his future, his moment to finally move forward. But when he looked at her again, the decision began to weigh heavier. The woman's lips parted as though she were trying to draw in air, but couldn't get enough. Her chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. Her eyes closed for a brief second, and her posture slumped just slightly, enough to show that she wasn't merely uncomfortable, she was in trouble. The boy's heartbeat drummed in his ears. The world around him blurred into background noise. The chatter, the footsteps, the rolling suitcases, all of it fading until only two things remained: his flight and the woman on the bench. One path was simple. He could rise, walk to the gate, and board his plane. No one would know that he had seen her. No one would blame him for leaving. After all, she was a stranger, and his future was waiting. The other path was uncertain. It meant risk. It meant sacrifice. It meant putting aside the flight he had worked so hard for, the opportunity he believed he couldn't afford to miss. But it also meant listening to the voice inside him that whispered, "This matters more." He stood. Slowly, almost against his own will, his feet began to move. Each step away from his gate and toward the woman felt like walking a tightrope between fate and choice. The closer he got, the clearer it became. She was gasping, her hand clutching her chest in desperation, her body trembling. In that moment, the flight no longer existed. The city lights he had dreamed of no longer mattered. All that mattered was the life of a stranger sitting helplessly on a bench, unseen by the rushing world around her. And he knew, without hesitation, that he couldn't walk away. The young man closed the last few steps between himself and the woman, his heart pounding louder than the airport's endless announcements. Up close, the signs were undeniable. Her face had lost its color, beads of sweat glistened along her forehead, and her lips trembled with the strain of each shallow breath. Her hand pressed firmly against her chest, as if willing her heart to steady itself. He hesitated for the briefest moment. He wasn't a doctor, not even trained in first aid beyond a few things he had seen online. What if he made things worse? What if he panicked? But as he looked into her eyes, clouded with pain and fear, the doubt dissolved. Doing nothing would be the true mistake. The boy dropped his backpack onto the floor beside the bench and crouched down in front of her, his voice soft yet urgent. No one else seemed to notice. Hundreds of people flowed past them, too caught up in their own lives to realize a crisis was unfolding in plain sight. He became her only anchor in the chaos. He told her to stay calm, though his own chest was tightening with nerves. He glanced around, searching desperately for help, for a uniformed officer, for anyone who might know what to do. But the seconds ticked by, and still no one came. It was just him and her, the world narrowing down to this fragile moment. Her breathing grew ragged, and her body leaned heavily against the bench. Instinct took over. He remembered reading once about heart attacks, the importance of staying calm, of loosening tight clothing, of encouraging slow breaths. With trembling hands, he steadied her posture, urging her to sit upright to ease the strain. He spoke gently, not sure if she could even hear him, but knowing the sound of reassurance mattered. Somewhere behind him, the gate agent called the final boarding for his flight. The words pierced the air like a cruel reminder. This was his last chance to leave, to run toward the future he had worked so hard to claim. For a split second, his mind screamed at him, "Go, get on that plane." But his body didn't move. His feet stayed planted, his hands stayed steady on her shoulders. His choice was made, though he hadn't spoken it aloud. He would not abandon her. Finally, his voice rose above the airport hum, calling out for help. Heads turned. A couple of passengers slowed, realizing something was wrong. Within moments, the tide shifted. Someone shouted to find security. Another pulled out a phone to call emergency services. The bubble of silence around them broke, and at last, others began to see what he had seen. Yet, the boy stayed closest. While strangers scrambled for help, he remained by her side, grounding her with his presence. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a brief second, they locked onto his. They were filled with something raw, fear, yes, but also trust. She was placing her life, her fragile breath, in the hands of a young man who had chosen to stay when he could have walked away. The seconds stretched into eternity. He could feel the weight of every shallow inhale, every fragile heartbeat, as though the world itself balanced on this woman's survival. He encouraged her to stay with him, to focus on breathing, to not give up. He didn't know if his words were enough, but he poured every ounce of determination into them. Then came the rush, security officers, airport staff, and finally the paramedics, weaving quickly through the crowd. Their arrival brought a wave of relief, But the boy didn't step back just yet. He explained what had happened, how she had been clutching her chest, how her breathing had grown weaker. His voice trembled, but his account was clear. The professionals moved swiftly, checking her pulse, preparing equipment, stabilizing her body. One of them asked him to give space, and reluctantly, he stood, his hands suddenly feeling empty without the responsibility of holding her steady. He stepped back into the crowd that had formed around them, his chest still heaving with adrenaline. As the paramedics worked, the boy caught sight of the gate in the distance. The door to his flight had closed. The plane he had dreamed about, sacrificed for, and believed would change his life, it was gone. A lump formed in his throat. He had missed it. The weight of that reality pressed down on him. He had traded his dream for a stranger's life. And though his heart told him he had done the right thing, doubt crept in. What if this choice cost him everything? What if his chance at a better future had just slipped through his fingers? But then, his eyes returned to her. The woman was breathing more steadily now, her chest rising with a rhythm that promised hope. The paramedics nodded to each other, their movements less frantic, more controlled. She was alive. She was holding on. And for the boy, that was enough. He stood quietly as they prepared to move her onto a stretcher. The crowd began to disperse, the drama fading back into the endless rhythm of airport life. Yet for him, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The echoes of the flight he had missed blended with the sight of the woman being wheeled away, and he realized his story had just taken a turn he never could have predicted. Because sometimes, destiny doesn't come in the form of the flight you catch. Sometimes, it comes in the form of the flight you miss. And this missed flight was about to rewrite his entire life. The airport returned to its rhythm quickly, but the boy's world did not. As the paramedics wheeled the woman away, he stood rooted to the spot, the echo of the last boarding call still hanging in his ears. His flight, the one he had worked for, saved for, prayed for, was gone. The plane had already left the ground, carrying passengers toward a destination that he had once believed would be the start of everything. Now he was left behind. He lowered himself onto the cold bench where she had been sitting only moments ago. His backpack rested at his feet, a silent reminder of the journey that would not happen today. He buried his face in his hands, the adrenaline draining from his body and leaving only exhaustion behind. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, not from running, but from the weight of realization. He had made his choice. Around him, the airport bustled as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Children laughed, business people hurried with rolling luggage, families reunited with smiles and embraces. For them, it was just another day. For him, it was the day that everything changed, and not in the way he had planned. He thought of the hours he had worked at the corner store, the meals he had skipped to save money, the nights he had stared at the ticket on his desk as a symbol of hope. All of it, gone in an instant. His sacrifice felt invisible. No one around him knew that he had given up his future to stay by a stranger's side. No one clapped for his courage. No one called his name over the loudspeaker. And yet, a quiet voice inside whispered, "You did the right thing." He lifted his head, eyes following the path where the paramedics had gone. The woman's face lingered in his memory, the desperation in her eyes, the way her hand clutched at her chest, the flicker of trust when she realized he wasn't leaving her. That image was carved into him now, deeper than any regret. Still, doubt gnawed at him. The world didn't hand out rewards for kindness. Life didn't pause to thank you for doing the right thing. What if this choice had cost him the one chance he had to break free from the struggles that had defined his young life? Minutes bled into an hour. He sat in silence, wrestling with a storm in his chest. People came and went, announcements filled the air, and flights departed without him. The boy was adrift, caught between the pride of saving a life and the grief of losing his own opportunity. Eventually, a security officer approached. The man's voice was calm, professional. He explained that the woman had been taken to the airport's medical wing for immediate care, stabilized, and then transferred to a hospital. She was alive, and the quick actions of a bystander had made all the difference. That bystander was him. The officer asked for his details, a simple report for the record. The boy gave his name, his age, his contact information. He signed his name on a form, feeling as though the pen weighed 100 pounds. Then the officer thanked him and walked away, leaving the boy alone once again. He looked at his boarding pass, still folded in his pocket. Worthless now, a reminder of what he had lost. He thought of calling home, but what would he say? That he missed his flight? That he gave it all up for a stranger? Would they understand? Or would they tell him he had made a mistake, that life rarely gives second chances? As the sun dipped lower outside the tall airport windows, shadows stretched across the polished floor. He felt the emptiness of waiting with no destination, no plan. His life had pivoted in a single decision, and the future ahead was now a blank page. But blank pages are where the greatest stories begin. He didn't know it yet, but that sacrifice, the missed flight, the willingness to stay, the choice to value a human life over his own ambitions, was about to open doors he never imagined existed. Because sometimes, the moments that feel like endings are only beginnings in disguise. The boy leaned back on the bench, closing his eyes for a brief second. He felt tired, worn from the weight of adrenaline and the sting of loss. But beneath it all, there was also a strange calm. He had done something pure, something selfless. And though the world hadn't clapped, though his future seemed uncertain, deep down he knew this truth. He had not failed. He had saved someone. And saving someone's life changes everything. At that exact moment, across the city, a woman lay in a hospital bed, stabilized but fragile, her mind slowly piecing together the fragments of what had happened. She remembered the pain in her chest, the fear that the world was slipping away, and then the boy's face. Young, determined, steady in the chaos. He had been there when no one else noticed. He had refused to leave. She didn't know his name yet, but she would. And when she did, the story of both their lives would never be the same. Morning light spilled through the glass walls of the airport, painting the terminal in soft gold. The boy had dozed off on the same bench where everything had unfolded the night before. His backpack was still at his feet, his unused boarding pass still tucked in his pocket. He woke to the sound of rolling suitcases and footsteps, the world moving forward as though nothing had changed. But for him, everything had. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion weighing down his body. He wasn't sure what came next. A new ticket? A long bus ride home? Or simply waiting, drifting in uncertainty? The thought gnawed at him. He had sacrificed his future for a stranger, and now he was left with nothing. Then, a voice cut through the noise. Not the hurried announcements of boarding gates or the chatter of travelers, but a deliberate, clear voice calling his name. He looked up. A security officer stood in front of him, gesturing for him to follow. Confused, the boy slung his backpack over his shoulder and obeyed. His steps were heavy, each one echoing with questions. Had he done something wrong? Was there more paperwork? The officer led him down a quiet hallway, away from the rush of travelers. At the end of the corridor was a private lounge, guarded by staff in suits. The boy hesitated at the door, feeling out of place in his worn clothes and tired eyes. But the staff opened it for him, as if he belonged. Inside, the air was calm, hushed. Plush chairs, soft lighting, the faint aroma of fresh coffee. And in the center of it all, seated with an oxygen tube gently resting beneath her nose, was the woman he had saved. Her posture was stronger now, her complexion no longer pale. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment, silence hung between them. She studied him, her eyes carrying both gratitude and curiosity. Then, with a faint smile, she gestured for him to sit. The boy lowered himself into the chair opposite her, unsure what to say. He wasn't here for thanks. He hadn't expected to see her again. Part of him wanted to shrink away, embarrassed by the attention. But she leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. She told him she remembered everything. The way her chest had burned, the fear of fading into darkness, and then his face, steady and determined in the chaos. She remembered his hands guiding her upright, his voice telling her to breathe, the way he had stayed when he could have left. She remembered the crowd forming only after he shouted for help, the paramedics rushing in only after he had already made the choice to act. Her voice wavered as she said it. He had saved her life. The boy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't know how to respond. He wanted to brush it off, to say he had only done what anyone would have. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Hundreds had walked by. Dozens had been too busy with their own destinations. Only he had stopped. Only he had seen her. Then came the revelation that froze him in place. She wasn't just any woman waiting for a flight. She wasn't just another traveler caught in the rush of the airport. She was one of the most influential business leaders in the country. A billionaire, known to the world for her companies, her investments, her empire. The magazines called her untouchable. The news called her powerful. People in boardrooms whispered her name with both awe and fear. But yesterday, none of that had mattered. Yesterday, she had simply been a woman gasping for air, and he had been the only one who stayed. The boy stared at her, disbelief washing over him. A billionaire? The kind of person whose world was built from wealth and power, whose name was printed on skyscrapers and headlines. He tried to imagine her as that figure, but all he could see was the vulnerable woman clutching her chest, her eyes filled with desperation. She seemed to sense his disbelief and smiled faintly. She explained that most people only saw the billionaire, the public figure, the empire. Very few ever saw her as human. But he had, and not because he knew who she was, but because he cared enough to act. That, she said, made all the difference. Then she asked him about himself. At first, he stumbled. What could he possibly tell her? That he was just a boy with a backpack, clinging to a dream built on a plane ticket he no longer had? That his life until now had been little more than long shifts, tight budgets, and restless nights? But her gaze was patient, inviting. Slowly, he opened up. He told her about the small town he came from, the struggles his family faced, the jobs he had worked to keep food on the table. He spoke of the ticket he had saved for months to buy, the flight he had believed would change everything. He confessed that he had missed it while helping her, though he said it without bitterness. Her eyes softened as she listened. When he finished, silence lingered in the air. Then she leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Finally, she spoke. Maybe that flight wasn't the one meant to change your life. Her words struck him like lightning. They carried weight, as though she wasn't just speaking from gratitude, but from knowledge. She said life has a way of rerouting us, of closing doors only to open others we never knew existed. Sometimes, the path we think we need isn't the one that leads us to where we're truly meant to go. The boy sat in stunned silence. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the surreal turn his life had taken. All he knew was that yesterday, he had been just another passenger waiting for a flight. And today, he was sitting across from a billionaire whose life he had saved. And whatever came next, it would be nothing like the life he had imagined before. Because destiny had found him. Not in the city he had been chasing, not in the plane he had missed, but in the choice he had made when it mattered most. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for more.